Social Inclusion for Resilience at IISD, the International Institute for Sustainable Development. And we're really happy and grateful to the D&C organizers to let us host this conversation here today. And I'm also really grateful to the co-hosts that we have brought in to help guide the discussion. Arrow, Out for Sustainability, Girls for Climate Action, and We Do. And we're really happy to have this space to dig into this important issue of intersectionality in relation to climate change adaptation. And this conversation builds on and will contribute to an ongoing initiative that IISD has been undertaking to really try to unpack what it looks like to take an intersectional approach to adaptation in practice and in policy making. I think we talk a lot about intersectionality, but in terms of actually applying it, it's very difficult to understand, what does it really look like? And earlier this year, we held a knowledge co-production workshop where we brought together a number of collaborators and partners, including our co-hosts here today. And this is really the continuation of that conversation and future conversations that we hope to convene around this issue. And we're really looking forward to having your perspectives. To set the stage for the conversation, we've just got a short video that I'm going to play, and the content of this was informed by the co-production workshop that we mentioned, so we're really happy to share with you. Thank you. So we're just going to have a very short panel discussion to kick off the conversations that you're going to have in groups. So I'll ask my panelists to come back on up while I introduce them. So on my far left, we have Bridget Burns, who is the Executive Director of the Women's Environment and Development Organization, or We Do. Bridget has been working for several years to integrate gender equality into the UNFCCC process, including as the co-focal point of the Women and Gender constituency under the UNFCCC. Then we have Menka Gundan. Menka is the Program Director of the Asian Pacific Resource and Research Center for Women, or ARROW. Menka is a feminist researcher and human rights activist, program specialist from Fiji, now based in Malaysia. Then we have Diego de Leon. Diego is the advocacy chair for Out for Sustainability, where he heads the international work of the organization across all relevant multilateral forums, including here at the UNFCCC, to raise awareness of the needs and experiences of the LGBTQ+ population. And joining us soon, we hope, is Joanita Bavirye, who is the co-founder and strategist of Girls for Climate Action Uganda. Joanita is a leader under the Generation Equality Feminist Action for Climate Justice Coalition and works on organizing women and girls at the grassroots in rural communities in Jinja in Uganda to fight injustice. Great. So thanks all for collaborating with us in organizing this conversation. And I just have two questions, and I'm going to ask each of you to answer them in turn. So the first is, why do intersectional approaches matter for just and effective adaptation? And I'll just go left to right here. So Diego. Sorry.
Perfect. It matters, and I think building on the video, it matters because it gives us the opportunity to really understand what are the needs, but also the experiences of all the different groups of people that are being affected by climate change, and how to respond through climate adaptation. Not everyone needs or has the same lived experiences, and therefore it's important to understand how different the experiences are, and based on that, try to address the needs. There's never a silver bullet, but the more we know, the better we're able to act.
Thanks, Diego, and thanks, Angie. I will come in because I think we've heard a lot about the definition, but I'll come in from Asia and Pacific perspective. And I come from a region where we are very vast, and those lived realities are also very vast. So talking about adaptation or any climate change issue is also quite unique for each of those narratives. Even if we talk about something as simple as a sentence like intensified tropical cyclones or more frequency of tropical cyclones. But tropical cyclones in Philippines versus tropical cyclones in Fiji mean two different things. So our lived realities are vast as well. So that's why an intersectional approach in terms of shaping people's narratives, looking at people's needs, whether you're from landlocked countries like Nepal or maritime countries or atolls like Marshall Islands, mean a lot to us coming from the Asian Pacific.
Thanks so much. I mean, I guess one of this is this understanding that if we don't understand power, who has it, who has access to it, we simply can't come up with effective, equitable policies around any aspect of climate, including climate adaptation. I think that's a foreground in our understanding of why we've worked so hard to bring a social justice lens to the climate change decision-making and policy space, and particularly as an organization. And I know there's a lot of work around thinking about what gender-responsive adaptation looks like, and we have specifically brought a gender lens into these negotiations, but there's a limitation to that if the scope of what we think of the lens of people's identities stops at gender. I think that maybe moving to what I know is your next question about that opportunity is that one of the most robust, and probably why it was an entry point, is because gender is one of the most socially defining intersecting identities that we have. But I think in pushing for that lens to be so critical to adaptation, to climate policy overall, it has opened up the opportunity for folks to take that a lot deeper. And I have never been in a national level or community-based meeting where we talk about what are the gender implications of adaptation that we didn't almost immediately start talking about intersectionality, because we recognize that the ways in which you can categorize things become limited right away, because then we start talking about, well, what about people with no access to certain forms of education, or what about young people? And it immediately becomes a much broader conversation.
Thanks. So my next question is, what's one challenge that you'd like to highlight in relation to applying an intersectional approach in adaptation?
Thank you, Angie, and thank you for organizing this event. When you shared this question, the one thing that came to mind was political will. I think that the curse, for lack of a better word, of democracy is that you're always trying to please the majority. And that, unfortunately, comes at a cost of kind of turning a blind side to other groups that might not be part of your constituency or might not, necessarily be a good political investment. Really, I think political will does play that in showing politicians and decision makers and policymakers on why this is important, and how, at the end of the day, the sum of minorities makes the majority. So if they're able to understand that, then where there's a will, there's a way.
And I think coupled with political will is also, in terms of, and constituencies, of course, is appropriate resources and appropriate knowledge and skills, because whilst we might include words like intersectionality, etc., in our policies or strategies, and we've seen some national governments do that, but they're not necessarily speaking to everyone in their population. They might just include a certain area of their population. So political will and also adequate understanding and resources around everyone and addressing everyone's needs.
Yeah, I would echo, I think we immediately start to see the challenges in terms of the fact that we're working from a space of scarcity, whether it's scarcity of resources, scarcity of rights. And that's really unfortunate, because I think it pits issues against each other. And what I've seen happen quite often is where I think that we want to be bringing an expansive approach to how we create inclusive adaptation practices in a space where maybe there's political will and ambition to move the needle on women's rights and engaging certain people at the table who've been left out. It becomes difficult when you're talking about power and giving that power to more people. And sometimes there's not the ability for solidarity because of the scarcity. And that's quite unfortunate, I think, in the ways that it comes about. I also am not, I think that part of the challenge that we see is the fact that it's hard. It's great watching that video, but it's also hard because it feels like such common sense that like we need to be building policies that reflect those most vulnerable, those who are left out of at the decision-making table, et cetera. And yet it feels like it's still difficult to create frameworks that do that. I'm not convinced that, it already feels like I see in these negotiations that we say the word intersectionality and people are like, what does that mean? Like why, I'm not convinced that using this term is getting us any closer to, even though I use it all the time, to the power piece of this that we're trying to get at. So it's the challenge of we keep trying to name the fact that we need to build power and be inclusive, and even by naming it, it feels like we don't always get that right. So I think there's a challenge in how do we actually get, and part of this for me, another opportunity I think is going back to this idea of how do you build in processes with deep consultation and consent that you're consistently talking to more people, bringing more people in, and getting their consent around the types of policies that you're developing or practices.
Thanks so much, all of you. And for those who haven't been following the gender negotiations, this has become a very hot topic. So this is a very timely conversation from that perspective. I really appreciate your insights. And this is just a little taster to get us started. And we're going to go into some groups now. But before we do, I just want to introduce our graphic reporter, Lulu Kitololo, who I hope has been able to hear us. Yeah, Christian's nodding, great. And will be working away to record the plenary parts of this conversation. And I know, having worked with Lulu, Lulu runs her own studio. She's a wonderful illustrator, and I know that we're going to have a very beautiful product at the end of all of this. So thanks, Lulu, for being here. You're going to get a break now while we go into our breakout group discussions, and then we'll come back for a report back at the end. And I see Joe Anita just arrived. Hi. Come on up. Thanks for being here. Do you want to give your quick 1 minute on why you think intersectionality matters and one challenge that you'd like to highlight?
Hi, apologies for being here late. I just landed today, so I was trying to figure out myself here. My name is Joanita Babire from Uganda. I work at Girls for Climate Action as one of the co-founders, but also I strategize with movements, and G4CA being a movement, the strategist there. I think for me, the topic of intersectionality is very core to the work that we do as a movement. And for us, why it's very important is we know that there are specific needs of different persons. And for the rural communities of young women and girls that we work with, for us, we feel intersectionality being part of the conversation or being part of policies and adaptation measures is a very core thing for us. Because when we don't do that, it means that we are leaving out the needs, the particular needs of different categories of people that are not general, that they're having their needs not being put into this general document. So I think rural women, rural girls, different groups of young people in all their different diversities have different and specific needs that we think when you talk about an intersectional approach to adaptation, to how policies are formulated, it might be core for us to have them into consideration. But the biggest challenge that we have is one, having conversations without those people in the room, not putting them at the center of all the things or the interventions that we are creating. But secondly, also, when we have data that is generalized and it's not disaggregated, we miss out the core needs. And it means that when we have this data that is general, we are leaving out the particular interventions that might suit these different categories of people, and appreciating or recognizing their diversities in the interventions that we're doing. So I think even at the national level, even with NDCs, I remember in Uganda when we're doing NDCs that are just going to be renewed, it was very difficult for us to say young people in their different diversities, young people living with disability, young people from rural communities need to be in the room. It was very difficult to make the decision makers understand why this is very important. And it's quite sad that we have to always and always convince decision makers about this particular topic, and knowing that it's very important for this to happen. But I think for the last NDCs, we managed to do that. And we've been pushing also for these NDCs as they're being revised to have a voice of different young people in their different diversities from rural communities, having consultation at the local level and seeing how their needs can be put into these different interventions. So I think for me, the challenges have been that, and the need as to why we need to do that is very core to the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists to join one table, and they're going to guide you through a conversation. It's not just going to be an open breakout discussion. There are steps that they will guide you through. So if you'd like to get up. Before we do that, sorry, we should thank our panel. Thank you very much. So if you don't mind heading out and joining one table, Jonita, I'll give you some instructions. So I guess you can go to the back one. And you'll have about, I haven't done a time check recently, about 30 minutes to chat. Can you put up the Zoom, please? I was wandering around and catching snippets of all the conversations, and I really wished I could have sat at all the tables. So I think we'll start here at the front. So each of the facilitators is going to share kind of one big takeaway from the conversation. And just to say, we're going to be capturing what's on the flip charts as well, so don't worry, all those ideas will not be lost. So I'll start here.
Okay, so it's very hard to have one key takeaway, but I think we centered around a real opportunity from a potential harm would be if we are building more communities of practice in terms of highlighting examples and taking intersectional approaches, to focus too much on, the token representation of people around the table versus a focus on a framework for understanding the drivers of inclusion as about practices of intersectionality. So what does that mean in terms of national processes that are being developed in relation to language justice or disability justice, who has access to spaces, who has access to knowledge, how is that done in a way that brings essentially more people to the table? So where there are opportunities in the Green Climate Fund or the NDCs or in these processes to potentially flag that we need to be taking intersectional approaches, to make sure we don't leave it with just a list of people to bring around the table, but actually a coherent framework of practices that gets us towards greater inclusion, and how that is deeply related to then trying to continue to make sure we're building coherently across that inclusion can't just happen in one ministry, on one policy, but really needs to be driven as a coherent approach across all systems. Something like that. We said a lot of other things, but that'll be one takeaway.
I may have time to go around again, so I'll go to the back here.
This was I want to congratulate all the participants. They had a very brilliant discussion. And the one thing that I want to highlight is that intersectionality gives you better outcomes in the sense that it can enable you to do a systemic and holistic change of by understanding how the different actors are interconnected, and that, of course, allows these different groups to be visibilized and empowered to make change. So it really is the way of getting more for your investment in a sense of just gives you better outcomes because of the reasons I mentioned. And however, there are, of course, power dynamics and political violence, and financial incentives might not be aligned in order to make this happen. But there is both a political and economic case for intersectionality.
I think just extending from what Diego was saying earlier around power, we also had this conversation around the opportunity to bring people together and to deconstruct power structures, especially, you know, from a bottom to the top approach on the types of people we are engaging as, you know, to narrate evidence, etc. In the grassroots, in the local processes is also important. So, you know, something like just having a gender focal point, etc. And also what Bridget's group also said about, you know, it's just not with one ministry. Those things matter in the type of evidence that comes across and informs discussions at the international level. And then with challenges, I think the one that struck out is around avoiding compartmentalizing and tokenizing intersectional approaches. We may unintentionally give more mileage to certain groups when talking about intersectionality. So, for instance, young people or people with disabilities or and other minority groups, etc. We may talk about them in different silos, in different, you know, in different aspects of the conversation, not necessarily recognizing that there are multiple identities, and this may create a, you know, a sense of compartmentalizing, operating in silos, and also tokenizing that, you know, we might bring a young person in the space just for the sake of bringing a young person in the space, and not necessarily bringing, you know, people who have lived realities and have experience around the particular conversation. So, yeah, that is what we had discussed.
Amazing, thank you. So, yeah, I think that point about not listing everybody came out in both groups, and I think that's quite important in this process that we're all here for, because inevitably someone's going to be left out, and that simplifies, as you say, down to these sort of siloed identities. And I really love the point about process as well, that this is all about process ultimately, and that we need to just make a better case around outcomes. So I think those are 3 fabulous outcomes, so thank you. We have been so great on time that I appreciate everyone being so concise that we can actually go around again. Maybe if one person from each table has something additional that you'd like to add, just something that struck you in the conversation or something that you're taking away, and maybe I will start back here at this table, and then we'll just do a quick one from each table, and then we'll wrap up. So does anyone from this table have something you'd like to share in addition? No?
One thing that came up twice was addressing and recognizing the opposition to these things. So we are all, I think Bridget said, this makes such common sense. Well, it does to us, but it mustn't to other people. So I think we were discussing the kind of, that it's more than just getting the message out, because when people get the message, they'll get it, and then we'll have made the case. There are forces that are actively opposing the things that we're proposing here, whether it be anti-woke or right, or just, you know, dismissed as lefty or too complicated as well, right? It's really tough, intersectionality, Gender, A, B. Okay, I can just about manage that. Youth, okay, add that. And it's, the more you add, and the more you recognize that everyone's intersections actually are critical, it's just too much. So there's a bit of that, like it's too hard. There's a bit of I don't quite get it, but there's a lot of actual, no, I'm against that. I don't think there should be gender rights, gay rights, disability rights, you know, and recognizing and addressing that is critical.
Thank you. Hugely important point. Does anyone at this table want to add anything from your conversation? No? No? No takers? No, I won't. Okay, anyone at this table want to add?
Yeah, it's nearly adding on that last point, because I am a left liberal, but it's hard. I'm afraid in 20 years' time, what is the intersectionality that I am right now stamping on that I don't know I'm stamping on? So you have to be open to listen and learn. And I think if somebody identifies as having a vulnerability or an intersectionality, then it's not my job to dictate yes or no. I have to accept that. And that's not always easy, even for those of us who are far to the left. So it's not that I understand the other side, but we all have to continuously work on it and recognize the agencies we come from, the context we come from, and how that actually dictates what we think and move it that way. So it's not that it's just I think just because I'm recognizing intersectionality doesn't mean I can just rest on my laurels and go, it's done now. It's something we all have to continuously work on to ensure that we're recognizing that it's a changing dynamic world and have to keep it moving.
Thank you. Anyone else? Last thoughts? No? Great. Well, I just want to thank you all. Those were extremely rich takeaways. And before I close us out, I do want to give Lulu a chance to just give us a tour around the report that she's been working on while we've been discussing. It's looking great. And thanks, Lulu, so much. Maybe we can give Lulu a hand. I don't know if you can hear the clapping, Lulu, but we're clapping. So this will be finalized. And yeah, just to say thank you all for coming to this session. As I mentioned, this is really part of a series of conversations on this topic that we're trying to convene. I think this point about complexity is really real. I mean, climate change adaptation is an already very complex process, and now, trying to overlay the complexity of intersectionality, there's a lot to unpack here, and I think we've started to dig in, and it's been really great to hear your thoughts. Just to say, for next steps, we'll be compiling the outcomes of the knowledge co-production workshop that we had back in May into a brief to sort of, communicate what came out of those conversations, and what you've discussed here, and the takeaways will certainly feed into that. So thank you very much, and watch this space. That'll be coming out in the new year. Yeah, and I think, as we've noted, this is a big issue in the negotiations right now. So we're going to be watching that closely and seeing how it unfolds. And I think, the more we can have grounded conversations about this issue, it will become more accessible, hopefully less threatening. We'll be better able to make the case for why it matters, that the outcomes are better, that it is possible. So I think these conversations are really, really important, especially in the context of pushback that was also alluded to. Yeah, so with that, I'm just going to thank the organizers for letting us have this conversation, Lulu for the beautiful documentation, Christian and our tech support in the back corner there, thank you. The co-hosts and panelists, you were amazing, and I really appreciate you signing up to co-host this conversation with us. And of course, all of you, thanks so much, and we'll close there. And don't forget to head over to the closing plenary. I think we're a few minutes early, so you have a bit of time, but it starts at 5:30.